All right, Mommy's gonna go. You see these M&Ms?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go help bathroom, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'll be right back. Don't eat any until I get back, okay?
Okay.
All right. Okay. Go ahead, Lila. Go to your potty. Okay. Wash your hands, Lila.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Congregational United Church of Christ here in Ocala, Florida. We welcome you to our online worship services, and thank you for joining us, and we all look forward to the time when we can get back together in person. Today's scripture reading is from Mark's Gospel, the 8th chapter. Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at the disciples, Jesus said to him, "You get behind me, Satan. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "Listen, if any of you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of God with the holy angels." A lot of symbolic language in this. Friends, listen. God is still speaking, and we are still listening. During a preseason football game in 2016, San Francisco 49er quarterback Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the presentation of the national anthem as nonviolent protest against police brutality and racism. As he said, "I am not going to stand to show pride in a country that oppresses black people and people of color. I'm not protesting the anthem. I'm not protesting the nation. I'm protesting organized brutality. To me, this is much bigger than football, and it would be selfish to look the other way. There are bodies in the street, and people are getting away with murder." Criticized and castigated from numerous points, the National Football League, Donald Trump, who cursed Kaepernick, Fox News, numerous legislators, and millions of citizens, Kaepernick was, pardon the triple pun, blackballed out of the NFL. Last week, the National Football League reversed its previous mandate that players on the field must stand for the national anthem, stating that it oddly stood for Kaepernick's kneeling in protest of systematic racism and police brutality. Kaepernick took a knee and triggered a moral, ethical protest. Recently, someone else took a knee. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin took a knee on George Floyd's neck, tortured, and killed him. And he too triggered a moral, ethical protest. No, triggered isn't quite the right word. Maybe focused is more accurate. But either way, 2 occasions, taking a knee, one non-violently, the other deadly. The 2 certainly were not identical, but similar to the degree that they articulated rarefied moral, ethical protests. Resonating with the image of what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd is very difficult for us because we because actually we can fathom what we saw. We saw it. Infinitely more difficult is picturing the abhorrent image of the cross. Although we have seen vivid videos of Mr. Floyd's deliberate torture and killing, nobody I know has ever seen anybody tortured and killed, crucified on a cross, screaming, bleeding, hallucinating, suffocating. And yet, Christians deem the cross its sacred symbol. Granted, yes, a few other people view it as fashionable jewelry or a wall decoration, but how ironic, huh? An instrument designed for torturing, killing, and inflicting as much pain possible for as long and demeaning a way as possible. The cross becomes the symbol of every moral and ethical value that employing an actual cross was not. Crosses had larger overriding purposes than inflicting horrific torture and death. Crosses were exquisitely perfect methods of social control, ideal for managing, say, runaway slaves or deserting soldiers and enemies of the state, and keeping conquered populations exactly where they wanted them, broken and underfoot. So they put crosses atop hills, along main thoroughfares, at crossroads, town centers even, to warn, obey or die. Crucifixions. Romans, Greeks, Syrians, that's what they called it. Others. It was very popular in the day. So, who was more responsible? Who was more responsible for crucifying Jesus? Would you say Roman authorities or Jewish authorities? Keep it rolling. What did Jesus do that triggered crucifying him in the first place? Religious reasons? Political reasons? Or did he just rub powerful people the wrong way? One more question. Did he die for something, or did he die for nothing? These are critical questions, but not just for historical or theological ponder, provided that we ask them in context with a measure of critical reasoning. So let's drill into Jesus' death by asking whether he died for something or for nothing. But let's ask that question like this. Did George Floyd die for nothing? Or did his torture and murder fulfill some long-range rationale, some divine need, some purpose for killing him? Or stated another way, was his death predestined? I'll deal with that one straight away. Hell no. Not a whit's worth more than Jesus' crucifixion satisfied God's vengeful bloodlust that by God somebody would pay for the world's sin. And so to show just how merciful God was in the long run, God had God's beloved, Jesus, tortured and killed instead of the whole world. Good deal for the world. Bummer for Jesus. Well, that's precisely what the church and its theologians, many of them, most of them, have for the most part fed us for centuries, drawing their theological axioms informed solely by ancient Christian scriptures authors, adding credence to their belief that God was in on Jesus' death somehow and not aloof and indifferent, because that would not be the way of love. Love, as you know, gives a hoot. So, same question as with Jesus' crucifixion. Did God author George Floyd's torture and murder to appease God's wrath towards, well, let's pick something. Say, racism? Substitute Floyd's death for the world's systematic racism? In what possible court of reason could that by any stretch make any sense whatsoever? But more humanely, how could that possibly be the nature of God's love? Does God pick selected individuals, Jesus among them, or George Floyd, or those children at Sandy Hook Elementary School, out of human history's hundreds of billions of people? Did God pick those people for brutal crucifixion to make a point? If that's your thinking about how God appeases God's wrath and personal bloodlust, could God not have simply reached down with a divine thump and drop-kicked Derek Chauvin from Minnesota to Mexico? Or is George Floyd's or those precious children murder proof positive that God wanted them dead? So if not by divine will or divine providence, did Rome torture and kill Jesus, or Jerusalem? They both were complicit. That's a stone-cold fact. But the more complete answer is this: the whole world killed Jesus. And here's the not one smidgen less true truth. The whole world's systematic racism and its thin blue line and its addiction to violence killed George Floyd and those Sandy Hook children and Jesus. Say it again. Say it again. Who killed those children? Who killed Jesus and George Floyd? The whole world did. Its conventions, its politics, its selfishness, its greed, jealousies, its prejudices. The most important question confronting us in our complicity with their deaths and others, given that you and I are components, even measures of the whole world, is: what shall we make of George Floyd's death? Solely a fact to remember, a Wikipedia entry, a freak moment of history, a terrible moment of the world's making, but this too shall pass? Or do we have another course? Could we follow his death in the best traditions of our scriptures and our forebears by making Floyd's murder, no less than Jesus' crucifixion, a channel to the divine? And you need to know this is precisely what picking up a cross and following requires. Not only discarding useless, cruel, and irrational theological beliefs that have absolutely no capacity to redeem us towards life and love, but something more personal, something more visceral. Picking up a cross mandates discarding parts of our lives that would sequester Floyd's death to some isolated historical tragedy, instead of marking this moment in our lives across history as a moment of transcendence. Why? Because only in discarding those parts of our lives can we possibly resurrect him from death. Keep asking this within gospel language. What does it mean to pick up our cross, this gruesome instrument of terror, torture, and death and control? The cross no longer keeps us in line or compels us to submit obediently to people who oppress or suck the life out of God's creation. But don't forget that knee that tortured and murdered George Floyd. Do you think he's the only one? Do you think that he'll be the last one? What in our time and place controls and dominates other people, keeps them in line, makes sure they remain obedient, ensures that they fulfill their proper role in systems of oppression and exploitation? Same for us. What controls and dominates us, keeps us in line, makes sure we remain similarly obedient and docile to oppression and exploitation. Jesus declared that participation in and submission to those systematic controls is how we lose our lives, our souls. But what do you think? That's what he said, but what do you think? Such systems become mechanized through heavy-handed and violent ways. We know that. We've seen it. But they slither in ways far more hidden, sophisticated, manipulative, even seductive. Either way, corporately or personally, they stand to rob us of life. And unless we stand against them, we lose ourselves to them. We lose our lives. And the cross we must pick up, and the life we will gain picking it up, is willingness to acknowledge both our complicity in and our capitulation to kneeling on the necks of others, wittingly or not, to those parts of our lives that need to die, because in such dying we gain our lives, and the world recovers a measure of its life. Call the Midwife is a British broadcast company network series about midwives in the 1950s serving poor people in East London. With all the infants delivered into lives of struggle and oppression, and love and support, sometimes a little precious one couldn't survive birth. In one episode, a young mother and father lost their little boy, and their grief was just unimaginable. And one of the midwives sat with the mother, whose grief folded over the mother, wave atop wave, until she had cried every tear in the world. And midwife Jenny Lee, gently took the mother's hand, brought their faces close to each other, and she said, "Just keep living until you are alive again," which is not unlike the constant task of losing our lives to regain them over the course of our lifetimes, personally and corporately, casting off lifeless skins for new life beneath. And perhaps in losing our lives and then gaining our lives, we can take a different knee. Amen. I offer a prayer today written by Byron Tyler Coles. Deep in the shadow of night, down near the crossroads and cemetery gates, with bitter liquor and cigar smoke wafting, I greet you. Clad in white upon the floors before shrines, following the names of the ancestors being uttered, I greet you. You are the sacred and righteous rage of my people. Echoing throughout time from the land of the elders, from depths of the oceans, I hear you now. You call us, you call out to us in the swirling winds, in the clamoring of lightning, in the crashing of waves, in the flow of rivers, in the rustling of forests, in clouds that move across the heavens, in the drumbeat of the earth. You are present in the cries of Black Lives Matter and no justice, no peace. You shimmer brightly in the flames of buildings crumbling to the ground as they are consumed in flame, in the calls for protest and direct action, in the stirring of pots, the laughter of children, in the tears and prayers of guardians. You are Black rage, and you are sacred, unbound, unapologetic. You swell in the hips and breasts, in the curved cheekbones, and in curved nostrils, the beats of hearts and pulsating thoughts, in exhaustion, in frustration, in numbness, in mobilization, in life, and you name yourself good. Holy and sacred Black rage, be ever present in our struggle for liberation, in our work to be, to love, to exist. Guide our movements in all forms as we strive to be good ancestors, ensuring that our descendants might look upon our memory with favor for you, for them. Invite us to live without fear. Dear, holy, and sacred Black rage, give life to this valley of dry bones. Move like fire upon our spirits. Stir within us, now and evermore. Amen.
what about me makes you proud?
Oh, man.
Dad, what about me makes you proud?
Dad, what about me makes you proud?
Oh, man. Dad, what about me makes you proud?
And I have to answer that one? Yes. Just about everything that you do. You're loving. You're funny. I could go on and on.
What makes me proud about you is you just being yourself.
I had trouble with alcohol. It was actually an intervention. Even with all the other people there, you were the real reason that I made the decision to go into the treatment center that I did. And thank you.
Thank you. You're helpful. Yeah, you forgot the funny part.
Your attention to hygiene.
Dad, I'm grateful to you for choosing to stay when I was little. Why am I crying?
At the time when I'm graduating and I'm packing up and leaving, then it's really gonna hit me. And
I think about a time when if you're not around, like that would be awful. But like you're the person that would always laugh.
Dad, I'm grateful because we didn't know how long you were going to be with us, so we're so happy that you're still here.
Dad, I'm proud of you for knowing that the most important thing was to just give your kids so much time.
I've always been impressed by you. You made it easy. Thanks.
I miss having the chance to just check in with you. I miss your sketchbooks.
I love you. I love you too. We don't say it enough.
Hey.
I love you, Dad. It doesn't compute until they're gone. So tell them now. Sort of weird standing so close to you.